Hello, my name is Rand, and today we're going to do 5 tips on how to invent plants and animals. These come from my book, 185 Tips on World Building, and you can get an ebook copy of this for free if you look in the video description and find the appropriate link. There are also a number of other resources there, some of which are also free, so poke around and see what you can find. Tip number 1 is to decide if you are going to invent plants or animals. There's no way we're going to invent the tens of thousands, if not millions of them that would exist in a fictional world, so usually we can get away with either doing Earth by another name or just adding a handful of either and making them count. In this case, a little goes a long way, but we don't even have to do that if we don't have an idea or we don't have any use for it. In science fiction, it might be a little bit more expected to have different plants and animals. Again, we're only going to have a few, and the reason for this is that these stories are definitely taking place on somewhere that is not Earth, or even Earth-like. We tend to expect new species, for example, so why not a few plants and animals as well? By contrast, in fantasy, we're used to seeing elves, dwarves, and dragons and what I call the usual suspects. So in that case, we often get away with just using, for example, run-of-the-mill horses. So we don't necessarily need to do it in that genre. Tip number 2 is to decide how you and the characters can use this. So we have food, obviously, because either plants or animals can be consumed. We have entertainment, which is only going to be for animals. Same for transportation, unless we have a plant that is actually mobile. We can also use plants in particular for medicine. And for animals, they can be guards. Technically, you probably could have a plant that was also a guard. And then there's pets. So there's a variety of uses we can use for anything. And sometimes one item will have more than one use, and this is a good way to get more mileage out of anything that you do create. But decide what your characters do with anything that you invent, and then how can you, as the storyteller, use this item? In some cases, one usage can lead to another invention. An example that comes to mind is if one plant is responsible for becoming a poison, then maybe another plant can be used as the antidote. So one of the side effects here is that invention can beget invention, and this is great. It's always nice when our ideas spawn more ideas. Tip number 3 is to use Earth analogs. One of the reasons for this is that it can take a lot of research to invent something from scratch, like an animal or a plant. By contrast, if we base our invented one on something here on Earth, or several of things here on Earth, then we've already got a lot of the research done for us. We may have to research that analog a little bit, but that's a lot easier than researching a whole type of plant or type of animal. Another reason we might want to do this is that there are sometimes facts about these analogs that we don't actually know. For example, I thought that both pumpkins and carrots only come in orange colors and that that's just the way they are in nature. But as it turns out, they're actually grown that way, and I'm not sure why that is, but as it turns out, we could create something like a purple pumpkin or a purple carrot and think that we're doing something new, when as it turns out, maybe not that color, but different colors do exist here on Earth. And so therefore we have not actually created a variation after all. So sometimes it's a good idea to get some of our facts right before we go about changing everything. Tip number 4, understand and use classifications for both plants and animals. This is a little bit of a dry subject, but it's a good one to understand because if you understand the way reptiles work, then you know things that you can do with them. For example, reptiles are cold-blooded and they don't need nearly as much food. So one of the things that we can do with this is have an area that doesn't seem to have a whole lot of wildlife in it, and therefore our characters might stroll in there thinking, well, there's probably no predators here. But the reality is that the predators could be reptiles, and therefore those reptiles can survive on very little food, and they could actually be dominating that area. And of course our characters could end up finding this out the hard way. This is the kind of information that we can learn about by reading a book like mine. The Creating Life book has a chapter all about plants and animals. And it goes through all these classifications and things that world builders can do with these and aid our understanding and help us come up with different kinds of animals that fit certain scenarios, and maybe our characters don't know certain things and they get themselves into trouble because of their ignorance. These same things are true of plants as well, because there are certain kinds of plants that we are more likely to invent, and they have certain properties that we should probably be aware of so that we can use them more intelligently. And it's not really a hard list of things. It's pretty short and straightforward. You can either do the research yourself or you can pick up a copy of my book and have it all handed to you, because that's one of the things I did for myself and for my audience. Tip number 5, know and understand the limits of plants and animals. Plants are pretty limited because there's only so much we can do with them. they're not going to get up and walk and talk and do things, unless you're talking about something like the Ents from The Lord of the Rings. But most of them, they're not really doing much, and we don't have much occasion to talk about them unless characters are eating them or something has been derived from them like a medicine or a poison. With animals, at least those guys are up and about, they're moving, they can be ridden, they can hunt us, but they can be hunted. So we have a little bit more use for animals, but in either case, we are not going to be doing a lot of exposition about these. So even if you look up things like the harvest cycle, you're probably not going to be explaining that to the audience because they're not going to care. And sometimes you can get people telling you, this sounds like something that you researched, so you could drop it into the narrative. And when people have said that to me, I thought, wow, they realized I had done that. I was caught. So just don't go overboard with inventing backstory and other things about plants and animals. This is a great reason to use an analog where all of that already exists. And if for some reason you want to drop a line into a story that you're writing, you can, and not go overboard because you didn't spend all the time inventing it. You just took that information from Earth. These tips are based on a chapter from Creating Life, and here is a summary of that chapter's contents. Summary of Chapter 6, Creating Plants and Animals. In fantasy, creating plants and animals is optional due to expectations that the world is very Earth-like, but in science fiction that takes place off of Earth, audiences are more likely to expect new ones. It takes less time to create these than other life, but we'll want to consider our time investment, how often our setting will be used, whether our creations impact our work and the impression they create, and whether the desire to do something unique and new is worthwhile for both us and our audience. Plants and animals are classified into categories like cycads, conifers, and flowering plants, and amphibians, birds, fish, mammals, and reptiles. The life cycle of the former and the behavior of the latter help distinguish them and can be used to propel or inhibit stories involving them. While we may have purposes for them as an author, our world's inhabitants have them too, such as decoration and medicinal uses for plants, and domestication, sports, guards, and pets and transportation for animals. Both can be used for food and materials to enrich life and our world. Okay, that's all for these tips. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to see more. While these tips come from 185 Tips on World Building, that book is based on my 3-volume series, The Art of World Building, and these tips come from Volume 1, which is Creating Life. There's more information in the video description. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. By the way, if you'd like more stuff to help with world building, my artofworldbuilding.com site has a bunch of free templates that you can download by joining the mailing list. You can click the link in the episode description or the little information button in the upper right-hand corner. There are over 20 of these templates, as you can see from this list. Most of them are Microsoft Word documents, but the 2 calculator ones, which come from my Creating Places book, are Excel spreadsheets that take care of the math for you. You can just type in measurements from a map and find out how long it takes to go somewhere by dragon, wagon, foot, or even ships. If you're enjoying the video, remember to click the like button and subscribe.